Good afternoon all, and welcome to another episode of the Kontakt Script Programmer. Today we're going to be looking at 4.12, which is the UI waveform display. The waveform display came around maybe 5.7, so it's very, very new, so you don't see it in too many plugins, but it's a great way to involve a little bit more visual feedback, although it does make for much bigger plugins. It's used quite extensively in maybe synthesizers and things like that. So there are a number of functions that UI waveform that does require things like set UI waveform property and get UI waveform property, which is around the chapter 12 mark. So I'm actually not going to touch on too many of them today. I'll talk about a couple of different things, but otherwise we're just going to show you how you can implement a basic waveform display in your software. So we declare a UI waveform by calling it a variable and then giving it a width and a height, which creates a waveform control to display zones and slices, and then later on we can use it to control specific parameters per slice and for drag and drop functionality, which you can imagine does become very handy. Things like MIDI sequences with something that you can sort of move around, or a beat making tool or a slicing kind of tool that you do see. I'm pretty sure things like Native Instruments has a few of their waveform display sort of things. They're pretty into that. So from here we initialize it. We declare a UI waveform called waveform that's 6 by 6. Then we attach a zone. So we have to actually attach a zone to it for it to display. Otherwise we're just going to have a blank waveform display with nothing in it. And then we go waveform and we say find zone test, and then we have 0, which is the particular flag, which we'll get into waveform flag constants if we look into these. So where are we got waveform flag constants? So yeah, later on in attached zone you see some of these. So we can do things like use slices, use a table. Table is bipolar. Table uses MIDI drag, and we can even use OR to grab on extra ones of those. Here we go, waveform property. So different flags like having the cursor actually move at the same time, which is pretty handy. So you can see that later on. What else have we got? Table values. So waveform constants, here we go. So use slices, use a table. Some of the different flags, some of the particular index slices, defines the start note for MIDI note and drag. So there's actually quite a bit in here that I can't really touch on just yet because they're going to be around later. So it's actually been since 4.1. I'm not sure what did I think came in 5.7. Oh, waveform styling options like colors and slice markers and things like that came a little bit later. So let's build this, and then I'll show you how to attach a particular sample. Now I'm not actually using test. I'm using an audio file I had on my computer called Hallway. Okay, so I've just imported that into here, so I can just show you what that looks like by just going in, getting Hallway, dropping it on everything. Okay, just so I have something to sort of display. So moving into the script editor, we have on initialization we declare a UI waveform called waveform. And then it's a 6 by 6, and we attach zone, waveform, find zone, test. Okay, except mine's not called test, mine's called hallway. So when we hit, actually I'll show you what it looks like as test. It's going to throw an error. So you see attach zone, zone not found, and we get nothing inside there. Okay, so then we have hallway. And we can see what it is there. Okay, now when we hit play, you notice that nothing really happens because we don't have a play callback, and we're not actually moving the cursor around or anything like that. For those, we'll have to look further into some of the other things that it lets us do with some of the flags. When you dive into, say, the mapping editor, and you pick specific things like sync and slice. So I just went through and hit use beat machine that gave me all these different slices. We could maybe even, make zones, different sizes and things like that. And that's handy because you can actually use those functions later on in here. So if I go into preview and I go back to one of those waveform constants, just to show you what some of these look like, we could grab these slices and table, and instead of the 0, because that's the flag, we could do use slices, and you can see immediately we see all these slices, and we can see that's pretty cool. And then we could add in UI waveform use table. Okay, and we can see that as well. So now it's slices, and we can even change the table values on each of those. Okay, so that's only going to really happen if you've gone into your sample and you've actually done a slice, and you've done some kind of pattern, or you've done something here that gives it enough information to play with. Otherwise, you might be a little bit disappointed that none of these options are available. There are a number of really cool functions in here. Like I said, like the play position one is probably one you want to see. So I'll just copy this for right now and drop it in. So on note, while we hold it down, play position, which we have to declare play pause. Okay, get event parameter position, or event ID, and then event parameter play position. Set the UI waveform property of waveform, which is what ours is. UI waveform prop play cursor, set it to 0, and play position. Then send a message for that, and as we hit play, you can actually see it stepping through there. Now, because I've done all this kind of slicing, it sort of steps a bit weirdly, but okay, now that's going to change depending on some of the other functions, as I said earlier in the wave editor. If we sort of played with these and changed the grid value so that it was a little bit cleaner, you can see all of these actually change immediately. Okay. Right, so now it's going to wait at each of these different spots. Just see once it gets to so there are a lot of different things you can do to make your waveforms a little bit more interesting, especially if you're getting into MIDI sequencing and little patterns. There's tons of ways to implement this stuff. It does get a little bit confusing, which is why I didn't want to touch on this too heavily, but it is a lot of fun and it does look really different, which is why I did kind of want to touch on them. So we're almost to the end of chapter 4, which is pretty crazy, and I will see you next time.